This is Music Parley.
My guest today is Josh Simmons. He is the co-founder and CEO of Vampr, which is a social media for creatives with a very intuitive interface where musicians can find people to collab with and monetize their work. He is also the founder and managing partner of Ripe, an indie record label based out of Melbourne, as well as an advisor for both Aspire, a gaming VR startup, and Emanate, an EOS blockchain solution helping artists get real-time royalty payments when their music is played. Oh, and did I mention a songwriter, guitar player, lead vocalist, Buchanan? Did I say that right?
Yes, you got it. Yeah.
That's a lot of plates to be spinning, Josh. First of all, welcome. Secondly, how is your time management like to be wearing all those hats?
Well, I made a decision at the start of 2017 to focus to always have one primary focus at any given time, which was a change for me because I had tried to, all those things you listed do take up time. And I had sort of previously tried to do everything somewhat equally and hedge my bets, but that's not a pathway to success. Sort of success really comes from, I think, honing in on something that you believe in, that you sort of believe in above all else, and doubling down on that. And so I made a decision at the start of 2017 to really put all the energy into Vampr, and everything else that you just listed does still happen, but it's not a huge chunk out of my time every month. So when it comes to things like songwriting, for example, I might only do a session once every 2 or 3 months. When it comes to my advisorial roles, generally speaking, things like that happen over phone calls, which would happen anyway. And so I'll get a call from a founder of a company that I'm involved with a question or a need, and they'll ask me for whatever advice I might be able to offer, and I'll give that advice. But I'm not involved in the day-to-day operations of any of those other companies. My primary focus is Vampr first and foremost.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's go back a little bit. How did you get started in music?
Well, music was a part of my life from as early as I have a memory, which would be about the age of 3 or 4. My family comes from a very, very long background in music. So my granddad he was a founder of a label called Leeds Music, which it was actually a publishing company, not a label, but it was acquired by Universal Pictures, the biggest film studio in the world, and ended up being renamed and restructured into what is now Universal Music Publishing Group, which is one of the largest publishers in the world. And so he was the chairman of that company up until the day he died in the year 2000. And along the way, he picked up, management clients as well, people like Tom Jones and folks like that. And he was also the head of the PRS, which is a collection society. So every country in the world has collection societies that basically collect royalties on behalf of musicians and pay them forward. And he was the head of the biggest one in England, or maybe I think the only one in England. So yeah, we had a family that was sort of entrenched in music, and my father as well, carried on that legacy. He was a business manager for all sorts of people, but he helped, Paul McCartney, for example, structure his legal structures, entities, however you want to call it, his publishing consortium after the Beatles. And we worked with a lot of very big names in the English music industry. And so when I was born into this world, that was just there, it wasn't unusual for us to be in rooms with quite influential musicians or sit in boardrooms while decisions were made about what single should be certain artists' next track. It was just kind of always there. And then when my mum moved me and my brother back to Australia in the early 90s, She introduced us to vinyl and, Diana Ross and Mike Oldfield and a whole lot of incredible artists. And so my love of music really stemmed from a very early age, and we had a piano in our house, and I learned how to play at a very young age. And so music was always inevitable for me. There was no way that I would ever grow up and not be involved in the business of music, whether it be as a creative or as an executive, and as it happens, both. So yeah, that's my background. And then as an artist, I had a project in Australia called Buchanan, an artist project, which did very well in Australia and in England and the Mediterranean. And that was about 10 year, it was all up, it was about a 10-year project, but it took me all around the world. We got played on international radio, international TV shows, toured with people like Keith Urban, did like 7 tours of our own. So yeah, it's always been there. It's always been a part of what I've done.
That's amazing. How did growing up in such a family, such an environment impacted you as a kid, besides actually playing? Like, did you perhaps, I don't know, jam with some people? Did you learn some skills early on that otherwise you wouldn't have?
Well, I wouldn't say that I was always jamming with people. In fact, one of the things I think that happens when you start to get some success or traction as a musician is, at least for me and some of my peers that I've talked to, collaboration's always key. So working with other people is great. But if when music starts to become your day job, when you get to the nighttime or to a social gathering or some sort of engagement, you don't really want to necessarily be jamming all the time. Like you kind of want to break from the music a little bit. So I didn't do a lot of, jamming just in that, like it wasn't like a musical house in the sense that there was always someone with a guitar or someone on the piano. It wasn't really like that. It was more like you focused on your craft, you learnt your skill, and then you applied it in the right setting, whether that's the recording studio or on stage. But I always treated it like a skill that I wanted to refine and get better at. It was never super social for me, although by virtue of the nature of music, it is social because you're sharing it with the people that you're in the room with, and you're sharing it to anyone who's listening. So music is an incredibly social thing, but I never saw it as an art form, like as a practice, as a skill set. I never viewed that through a particularly social lens. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm rambling a bit, but it's hard to quantify exactly what I'm saying. But I've never walked into a room and said, let's jam. That's not really my thing.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. If it's your job and if it's your full-time thing, you would like to step back from it and zoom out. And
I've always loved, though, I like being in a professional setting with people who are working on their things. So like I love going and visiting recording studios when other artists are leading the room. It's a very humbling and eye-opening experience when you sit in on a recording. And I got to do this from a very young age, like before I turned 10, I got to sit in on sessions where I could see, pretty famous people going through their creative process. And I learned so much from just watching and observing. And the number one lesson you learn is just shut up. You're not, when you're invited into the room, but you're not a part of the process, the key thing is to not talk. And I do sometimes see with especially emerging young musicians that maybe haven't released a song yet, but have a real passion, they can have a tendency to offer an opinion where it's not necessarily wanted. So it's a good lesson to learn at an early age, is maybe keep your mouth shut when you're in a recording studio, or if someone's doing a sound check and ready to go live in a couple of hours. You gotta bow to the respects of the performer.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Out of all of those creative processes, did any of them stand out for you?
Well, my favorite domain is in the recording studio. That's where I feel most at home. That's where I feel most creative. But the recording studio for me is very similar with what I do in Vampr, being in an office environment and working on financial plans or pitch decks or challenging assumptions and working on experiments and hypotheses. I think I like the process of putting things together behind the scenes before other people get to see it. It's very exciting because you're crafting an experience, even if you're wrong, even if all of your assumptions are wrong, you're crafting an experience that someone somewhere else on the planet, could be anywhere, could be 10,000 miles away, will touch at some point or listen to or experience or feel. And when you're working on that, it's very humbling to know that you are going to either positively or negatively have an impact on someone at some point, just by virtue of creating something out of thin air. That's such a powerful thing. And music is one of all art is like that. All art is creating something out of nothing, which is incredible. But music's probably one of the fastest art forms if you think about it, because if you think about fine art, some artists can take years to work on a painting, but typically maybe 6 months. If you think about a film, that's like a 2-year production and 300 people might be involved. Music is quite a lot faster. You might have maximum 6 or 7 people involved in the song creation process. Sometimes there's more, but typically speaking, a handful of people. And from concept to market can be as quick as 6 months. And that's a really rewarding thing. And it's similar in apps, because every time we work on a new version of Vampr, we have an idea, we have whiteboards, we have Photoshop files of mock-ups and what have you. And then a few months later, people are using it, they're touching it, they're experiencing it. And that's a very rewarding place to be, because you're getting constant feedback from fans, users, listeners, and you're constantly learning how to be better. And you're constantly refining your craft, which is the thing that keeps me going.
I can listen to you speak for like hours, man. You do it with such a passion. So you touched on Vampr. What does your role at Vampr consist of specifically? And what's the most fun activity out of everything you do there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, as the CEO of the company, I have to have some level of experience and input on every part of the business. So whether that's marketing on some days, development on other days, sometimes, for example, today we were working on, just a couple of hours ago, the algorithm that connects people from across the world. So obviously that's written by smarter people than I am, but my input is essential. And the way our algorithm, just to give you one example, works is that we connect people based on common interests. So if you log onto Vampr and we know that you like Kanye West and Drake, we want to be connecting you with someone that you're looking for who also likes Kanye West and Drake, because we know that you guys are going to have something in common, right? But before we get there, we have to also check, do they like the same genres? Are they in a close proximity? Are they looking for something, what we call mutual scores? Are they relevant? Are they active on the platform? And so then we have this algorithm that does like 60 things in a row in a millisecond, and it does all these passes, and it constantly scrapes and gets rid of candidates and then brings good ones in, and it's just working overtime all the time. And so I'm involved on something like that on a very high level, and I'll design it graphically. So I'll draw diagrams and I'll say, this is how I would like it to work. And then I'll assign that to someone, that I'm simplifying it. Then it goes to committee and we all debate the merits and we refine it. and then our CTO weighs in with an approach, and then it goes to a tech lead, and the tech lead says, this is how I think I'll make it. So that's just one little thing. That was 15 minutes of today, for example. Just an hour before that, I was reviewing a video that we're about to release to the public that has a lot of different moving parts, footage of the company at work, footage of our users, and some other stuff I can't talk about, but I had to review the current draft of that and give my feedback. A few hours before that, I was on the phone with the VC pitching, where we're at and what kind of money we think we need to get to the next vantage point. So my job is very fractured. I wear about 70 different hats, and I have to be moderately good at all of them in order to pull this together and pull it off. And fortunately, I've been doing this for 6.5 years now. I'm pretty good at most of them. The hardest part, and a lot of young leaders find this, is delegating with comfort. So I'll delegate a lot and frequently, and sometimes I'm disappointed and sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised. But one of the skills that I'm still learning to do better is, how do I delegate with trust but quickly? So that sometimes involves hiring and sometimes involves firing, or a combination of the two. And it's a really, really tricky thing to get right, and I'm still learning. But yeah, as things scale, you can't be a jack of all trades. You just have to, you have to be an overseer of all trades, and trust your team to execute on the details. And that's my job at this point.
How do you find people that you trust they can do the work?
Usually word of mouth. Like we have one team member right now, her name's Jessie, and she's a data sort of scientist, and she came to us from a former team member who we'd hired for a different role, and it didn't work out in the end, but he had introduced us to her, and then she stuck around. So I like everything in life, it's a little bit of a domino effect. One domino falls and then you're at the next one, and then that falls. And the best hires that we've had, and we have a very low turnover rate. Most people who work at Vampr have been there from very early on, but most people come because of either word of mouth or one thing led to another thing that led to that. Like, for example, just last week we advertised for a new role. We were looking for a head of sales, and we're still yet to make a formal offer to anyone, but we advertised in a whole different venue, a whole different range of venues, like from LinkedIn to music trade publications. And then the person who will possibly offer the role to didn't come through any of the places we were advertising and came to us through a mutual contact just at the right time. And so it's things like that. And I always know that it's a good fit when it happens serendipitously. It's often not a good fit when you hire a recruiter or when you go through LinkedIn. So yeah, it's a good question. And I look at companies like Facebook with 40,000 employees, and I just wonder, how do you even have time to meet 40,000 people, let alone make 40,000 hires? But I'm sure that as things progress and scale, that's what HR departments are there for. But at this early stage, we have 16 people on staff at the moment, which for me is quite a lot because I deal with all of them. But there will come a time, probably quite soon, where I imagine I'll be less involved with the direct hiring.
Yeah. Are you looking forward to
that? Well, I'm looking forward to what that whole period of the company looks like. I'm not looking forward to being less involved in hiring. It doesn't really matter to me if I'm involved or not involved. I just want the best person. So I don't really care. I mean, I do care. What I mean is, it doesn't matter if I'm the one doing the hiring or if an HR person's doing the hiring. It's irrelevant as long as they're qualified. What I'm looking forward to is the point where the company is making enough money that we're in a position to grow beyond 16 people and become a 50 to 100 person company. That is the next step. We're on our way there, and I think we'll be there quite soon. And at that point, it's going to be very hard to remember names.
Yeah. One of the areas I'm really interested in is A&R. And with Vampr, I've noticed that you have your own A&R team, and which is helping pro users get with their career objectives, building their own playlists and putting together their own select artists. I'm wondering, how is A&R evolving in this context of social media today?
Well, A&R is such a pivotal role in all music companies, obviously. And I think there's no better example than TikTok at the moment. I mean, right now, so A&R people in general have always been probably underpaid given how important their role is. But TikTok is a market-based solution for A&R in much the same way that Vampr is. And what I mean by that is that someone can become a star on TikTok just by virtue of the number of plays that they have, because their algorithm's very efficient at finding cool shit. And that actually means that the job of an A&R person is under threat, because the market is doing the job of the A&R person in discovering the talent, right? You still need an A&R guy at any company, guy or girl at any company, to actually go and try and woo that artist and sign them and offer them an advance or some sort of benefits, or pitch them why you should be with us. The role of the A&R team in Vampr is a little bit different. We take a hybrid data approach and human approach. So we look at artists on the platform that are doing good numbers on Vampr, because that's our unique IP that no one else has access or insight into. And we take that data and we mix it with the taste of the folks that work for the company. And ultimately, if there's something that people seem to be resonating with and we like it, then we'll go out of our way to help those artists. It's not something that we advertise. A mistake a lot of music tech companies make, and it's been happening for decades. I remember the early days of Reverb Nation saying, want to be a star. And when Baz and I started Vampr, we always said one thing we promised us, and it's still in we have this marketing page that says these are the rules of the company, and it's still there as number one. Never promise something you can't keep. So we don't promise to turn anyone into a star, but it just so happens that we have behind the scenes, and we don't boast about it and we don't advertise it, but we've helped quite a few artists with money, with introductions, with support in other ways. And quite a few of them have gone on to do some pretty big things. So we view our role as being a bit more quiet and behind the scenes, because the way that Vampr can only work is if it's a fair, democratized platform where everyone has equal opportunity. So it doesn't help if we then come on over the top of that and say, we'll decide who's going to become famous, because that's not our job. Yeah. Our job is to help where we can and where we see appropriate, because if they do well, hopefully they talk about Vampr, and then that's good for everybody else who's on Vampr. It's this idea of network effects. If one person on the platform goes to the stratosphere and is the next Drake, then that's going to elevate everyone else on the platform. So our job is to nurture, and that's what we do. I'll give you an actual tangible example. There was a band that we discovered on Vampr about a year ago, maybe a bit more, called China Moon, and they're an English band, and they lost one of their band members, a key band member, quit a few weeks ago, and they're looking for a replacement. Now, they could use the app and find the replacement themselves, and they're doing that, but we took it upon ourselves, because they're signed to Vampr Publishing. We took it upon ourselves to actually go out and help them with. They didn't ask us to, we just decided, we saw it happening and we were like, let's go and try and help them. And so we've got a couple of people working on that right now. So that's how we work our magic behind the scenes. But again, we don't advertise that as a service. It's just something that makes sense. Yeah.
I love this kind of family feel that you bring to it.
That's I mean, I was always an independent artist. Even though I had signed deals, they were to big independent well, they weren't they were the big independents who had their own distribution deals and what have you. But I learned how to do things myself, and I saw a lot of the problems in the industry. I experienced a lot of the problems in the industry firsthand. So on the one hand, I had been born into a family that dealt with major labels, and then on the other hand, I had a successful career that was done entirely independently. And so I think that combination of experiences allowed me to bring to Vampr a sense of empathy and compassion that maybe other companies don't have. Now, some investors would probably say that's a potential weakness because, you know, from an investor perspective, their mindset is profit above all else. But I've been around the block a few times, and I know that longevity is directly linked to credibility and integrity. And I would much rather exhibit those qualities at this stage in the company. I'm sure Vampr will grow to a point where maybe I will no longer be the CEO, and someone else who's perhaps a lot smarter can work out how to make a lot more money. But my job right now is to make this the warmest, least threatening place in the music industry.
That's an amazing way to put it, actually. Going back to the thing you mentioned about apps and A&R and how A&R can be potentially replaced by the algorithm and so on.
Just data, just straight up data. Yeah.
Would you see A&R under an app format, like an app that connects A&R with artists to organize tasks, have all the contacts centralized, and get event invites, like a kind of CRM for A&R?
Yeah, like A&R as a service, if you will. Yeah, like a saying. Yeah. I mean, I feel like companies like Disco are tackling that a little bit. We're tackling it in a little bit because one of the categories on Vampr is A&R, and there's tens of thousands of people in that category, and they can connect with artists and artists can connect with them. But we don't offer yet. We don't currently offer anything beyond that, like sorting features, prioritization, scheduling, and we probably won't anytime soon because that's very niche. That's super niche. And the thing that I think people forget about with apps is they're somewhat expensive to build. They're certainly expensive to maintain and grow. And often people have very big ideas for app products, but the market size doesn't justify the investment. And a lot of people don't do enough market research before they embark on their journey of making these big products. What ends up happening is the founder runs out of money and ends up going to work for a label, and some of them, or for a company, and some of those products get acquired, which is the best outcome for the founder. But typically speaking, I wouldn't imagine that an A&R specific app would ever arrive. What's actually happening at the major labels right now is they're building artificial intelligence solutions to scrape data across all platforms, you know, from YouTube to Spotify to companies like Vampr as well, and a lot of other music startups. And they're trying to get as much data as possible, and that they build profiles around artists. And those, then they have their own ranking systems and their own data scientists. And then an A&R person who might be making 50 grand a year will log on to their platform, and then they'll see a report that says these are the new artists we should be checking out this week. So I think that's where it's going. It's not going to be an app. It's more like proprietary in-house software that major labels have to build, because major labels' entire business model is built around signing relevant artists who are destined to explode and become superstars, because that's how they make their money. And the problem with things like TikTok is that, even before TikTok, look at Chance the Rapper. People like that go, I don't need the backing of a major label, not exclusively anyway. I might do a licensing deal. I might license off some of my IP, in exchange for a massive marketing budget, but they don't need them. And labels, and it's already happening. I mean, I think the most recent media report showed that 50% of the money coming into the recorded music sector is coming from indies. So majors already have a shrinking market share.
Yeah.
And the market share, the more worrying thing about that, so when you look at any market, you can talk about dots and lines. So a dot is just a point in time, but a line is a trend, right?
Yeah.
And the trend, or the line in this case, is showing that their share of market, the three majors that still exist, has been shrinking consistently year over year. So you've got, on the one hand, we've got predictions, quite reliable predictions, that recorded music and the value of that market is set to double in the next decade. But on the other hand, you have the major labels as a percentage share of that market shrinking year after year. So we're going to be in a situation in about 10 years' time where there's twice as much money flowing around and twice as many subscriptions on streaming platforms, and major labels will be making half as much, potentially, right? And they need to address that problem. So to tie the whole thing back together, I don't think you're going to see an A&R app. I think you will just see major labels double down on data scientists, on algorithms, on tech as well, to support their core business, because otherwise they will cease to exist.
They already are going into gaming. They're like branching into other things, so they can survive. What's the ideal destination that you like to reach professionally, both with Vampr as well as your own career? What would that North Star look like for you?
Well, one of the things I wanted to achieve with Vampr was to change the landscape of music so that so every day, something like 30 or 40,000 new songs are released on Spotify or what have you. I wanted to own a share of, not me personally, but I wanted to be responsible for a large portion of that, because then on my deathbed when I'm 80, I could look back and say my platform helped people make new music. And when you view it through that lens, I've actually already achieved what I set out to achieve. So when I realized that, some time back, that we had already had an effect on the landscape of music, I had to change my goals. And so now the goal for Vampr is more personal and aggressive. I've kind of done the philanthropy side of it. I feel like I can tick that off. For me now, the goal on Vampr is to prove to myself that I can sell the company or take it public, either. So I'm committed to that, and that's not going to be an easy task, but I'm committed to it. On a personal side, I'm very much looking forward to the day where, even if Vampr went on to become a unicorn and I made a lot of money, I actually quite consciously don't want to go back into tech after that. And I'd like to go back to just being a full-time songwriter, because those were the happiest days of my life. And I think that happiness is more valuable than any check I've ever seen.
Man, that's so powerful. Jesus Christ. Yeah, that's a very good answer.
Yeah. So that's for me. I mean, and I still maintain I have to actually work on it like everyone does. I still have to work on the relationships with my favorite writers that I've ever met, because when the time does come for me to become a writer again, I need to know that I'm not starting completely from scratch, and that I've got people that want to still work with me. So I still foster those relationships and treat them with respect and care. And one day I look forward to picking up the phone and saying, let's work. I'm a little bit too busy at the moment to do that. Like just yesterday, I got invited to a session with some of the biggest writers in the world right now. And I didn't even know that when I got invited, but I had to say no because we were doing something. We were shooting a video that I was talking about earlier for Vampr. And so I had to say no. I look forward to the day when I can say yes.
Amazing. From your position as a kind of an overseer of the music industry from so many angles, where do you see it heading? And what's the most interesting trends that you've noticed? And how could perhaps creatives adapt and make the most of it?
I think the most interesting trend that I have observed over the last few years is the role of fintech in music. And that's this idea of a distributor, and a lot of them are doing it. We're not yet, but we might in the future. Hold on, I've got a very sore throat today. We might in the future, the ability for a distributor to offer advances to artists. So let's make up a case, but it's probably true. So TuneCore sees artist X with monthly recurring revenues of $20,000. So they know reliably this year they'll make $250,000. They can go to the artist and say, we'll write you a check for $250,000. Here's the interest rate. Here's the repayment terms, blah, 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 whatever, however they structure it. I don't pretend to know the specifics of each company. That is going to threaten the business of the majors, because let's think about this from another way. I'm Justin Bieber. I've signed a 5-year contract with Universal. I'm at the 5-album contract rather. I'm at the end of my contract. Now I can either re-sign with the major, who's going to take 60 to 80% of my profits, or I can go to a distributor / aggregator, take a cash advance that's better terms than the bank will offer, and fund my own career, and I already have the fan base. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be the biggest change you see over the coming decade. And the cool thing about that is it's totally exclusively based on facts and data, which means that you could be an obscure artist in Nigeria, but that happens to make a certain sound that resonates with a certain audience, and you're bringing in, like I said, 20 grand a month, and you can now get financed, whereas before you couldn't.
Yeah.
It just wasn't possible, and you couldn't get a look in from A&R. So I think the role of fintech in music could change the entire landscape very quickly, and it's beginning to happen, but I think it's going to accelerate. And I see that as the most exciting development in music, because it's going to empower folks. Like I met one guy a few years ago who he had like 10 million monthly listeners on Spotify, but he had 2,000 Facebook followers. And it's because he was making something so niche, but just because it's niche doesn't mean that the audience isn't fucking huge. So it's folks like that 10 years ago, he would not have gotten an advance. And now he's worth a lot of money to someone. And I know that he's gone on to sign deals. I think that's where it's really going to allow people, all corners of the globe, in all countries, to have an opportunity to make a living out of their love. I also think the other exciting thing that's happening already and is going to happen more is less of a reliance on the West for the pop stars of the future. Not even pop stars, just for the money makers. And again, the most recent media report, the same one that showed that the majors had a diminishing share of the market, also showed that markets outside of North America are growing as a proportion of the overall income for recorded music. And so I think, we're going to see markets other than North America become increasingly dominant, and the role of fintech combined is going to see really interesting music come to the fore. And BTS is probably not a bad example of an early stage byproduct of those market shifts. K-pop was already a thing, so maybe not the best example, but I do think we're going to see more of acts like that come from different countries that dominate.
Yeah, definitely. I love your answers, by the way. They're very Not what I would expect. They're
What would you expect?
I didn't really have any expectations, but they're really insightful. They're really like thought out, and I can tell your fingers are on the pulse really, really well.
I live and breathe this industry, so
I can feel that, man.
yeah.
I want to talk about you a little bit. As most CEOs, like I said, you have a lot of things on your plate. What are the rituals and routines that you have that keep you sharp and creative? Do you have any of those?
Yeah, let me open my phone because I have a trainer, like a personal trainer, physical, but he also discusses, routine and stuff with me. And I just want to find this word that he uses. So just give me a second, because this word is, I think, really key to your listeners. I think they'll like this. So my check-in, let me just review this. I want to find the terminology specifically. All right, so view results. All right, so we have every week, we don't change it every week, but I have to be accountable each week to what we call the 3 physical standards. And I think this really changed my life in the last year. So your physical standards can be whatever the hell you want them to be. It might be every morning I'm going to have 1 piece of toast before I do blah, or but I'll tell you mine. So a few months ago, I decided I'm not going to wake up and roll straight into a meeting, because when COVID hit, everyone started working from home exclusively, and I would literally roll out of bed into my first call. And it worked, but it wasn't great. And I always started the day in a bit of a funk. And so I set a physical standard of, I will go on a 30-minute walk before I take any phone call or respond to any emails. Every day, every single day. And so before I go to bed at night, I look at my calendar, I look at what's the first call of the day. And if it's 9 a.m., then I'll set my alarm for 7:30 so that I've got an hour and a half to get a 30-minute walk in, a shower, a moment of center. And so that was one of my physical standards. The other is that I decided I need to walk about 4 kilometers a day, a bit more, maybe closer to 5. So I stick to that every single day. I haven't dropped a day in about a year. And I also try and get to the gym 3 times a week on top of those other 2 things. So I think that keeps me focused, and having a trainer keeps me accountable, because if you're not accountable to someone, then you're likely to not follow through.
We need the drill sergeant.
Yes, exactly. You need someone going, I noticed that you fell off this week. Why? And then that forces some inner reflection and dialogue, some soul searching.
Do you believe in the law of attraction? Is that something you believe in?
In what sense? Because that can be applied in multiple different ways. Can you be more specific?
In terms of building a mental image of what you would like to reach and achieve in terms of objectives and destination, and then just reverse engineering towards that. And attracting the sorts of people that right now you wouldn't be able to, but you slowly build up to that.
Yeah. Yes and no. So I don't believe in The Secret.
No.
Yeah.
No, yeah. That's not what I meant.
No, I know that's not what you meant. I identified at a very early age, and I wish I could say that the thing I identified had matured over time, but actually it hasn't. I identified at probably about the age of 18 or 19 that paralysis is probably the most dangerous thing to achieving a goal, insofar as I've seen a lot of my peers and friends, not professional friends, like just personal friends, hit crossroads and they are paralyzed by fear. If I leave this job, I can take this job, but it might not get me to here. And then how do I get to there? And my advice, the sort of realization I came to was it doesn't matter ultimately which way you go, so long as you're moving. So my view is that if you're always walking forward, and you might go slightly to the left, slightly to the right, and then come back to the left and realize that you should have been on that side, it doesn't ultimately matter. The key to, well, success is obviously a very personal word and is subjective, but the key to achieving, I guess, whatever it is your end goal may be, is movement. And a lack of movement will guarantee one outcome: you won't get there. So my true belief, I don't so much believe in the law of attraction, I believe in effort. And I also believe in micro steps and micro progress. Like, and it's ironic for me to say that because I'm an impatient person in the short term, but I'm a very patient person in the long term. And I know that sounds oxymoronic, but so in the short term, I want everything now, but I also have the capacity to concede and go, it's not going to happen. On a long-term basis, I'm able to go, things are slowly ticking into, it goes back to that domino thing, like one domino will lead to the next. And I'm very patient in that respect. So I just believe ultimately in consistent effort. It's constant movement, no matter how big or small. Some weeks you'll take massive fucking leaps. Some weeks you'll make mere baby steps, but as long as you're putting in the effort, the universe will reward you. And let me be even more specific to any artist that's listening. I nearly gave up on music in 2015. I had an album that was written and recorded, but I knew the audience had evaporated a little bit and I was not going to put it out. And a friend said, just put it out. And I was like, no, you can't just put it out. We spent money on it and time on it, but there's got to be a plan. And he's like, I don't just mean just put it out, but make up a plan. Just come up with some sort of plan and just try and do something. And so I put effort in and I booked a show, and then that led to a TED talk, and then that led to a small club circuit. And then all of a sudden my music was back on the radio. And then all of a sudden I was able to put the album out. And then a few weeks later, Keith Urban called, and then I was doing a stadium tour. Now, The only reason that happened is because I put effort in. And like I said, like the first step was really small. Like I booked a tiny show, and then someone turned up to that show that put me on a bigger stage. But the person who put me on the bigger stage wouldn't have been able to put me on the bigger stage had I have not taken that baby step of booking a small club show. So the universe rewards effort, and the universe certainly does not reward no effort. And people who sit at home and go, why aren't I famous, or why isn't it working for me? They have no one to blame but themselves. And that's not because maybe they're not talented enough or what have you. It's truly because in order to be, if you think about it just in layman's terms, how can someone discover you if you're not putting energy out there? Like energy can only be harnessed if you're giving it. So you have to give in order to receive. And so, yeah, I really think it's that simple. Effort is rewarded, and consistent effort particularly is the building block to a career, or, a sustainable life, if nothing else.
Yeah. So basically, the worst decision is indecision.
Yes. Yeah, I would say that. That's not to say that you shouldn't sometimes take pause and evaluate what's going on in your life or your circumstance. But once you've taken stock, you then have a responsibility to make a decision. Now, that decision might be, I'm going to park this project and I'm going to embark on something else. But the decision can't be, I need more time to think.
You have a very interesting perspective, because I know that there's a momentum to things in life, and that momentum, that wave that's building up.
I also truly believe momentum is something that is like a scarce commodity. And when I do believe that most humans at some point in whatever they're doing, whether you're Beyonce or whether you're working at a McDonald's checkout lane, in whatever field you're working in, at some point, if you're putting in effort, you will get a sense of momentum. And when momentum arrives and when it presents itself, it is your responsibility as an individual and as a human being to capitalize on that momentum and run with it. Because I have a bit of a theory. I think momentum only hits people a few times in a lifetime. And anytime that you get even the sense that maybe you're riding a wave, grab that wave, hug that wave, love that wave, and ride that wave, because it might be another decade before it comes around. You know, momentum can be fleeting, but, you know, think about Ed Sheeran. He and I've, you know, we've crossed paths in some ways because I was living in London for a while when he was just breaking, and he was a busker, and then a producer found him and liked what he was doing, and they made some EPs together, and the momentum started to build, and he grabbed that, ran with it. He did 6 EPs from memory. I don't want to be misquoted on that, but I think he did 6 EPs before the song The A-Team dropped and his first album came out. And then now he can book more Wembley shows than Coldplay can. I mean, that's a classic example of like effort, the momentum wave, grab the wave, ride the wave, create a life for yourself. And I think anyone can create that moment with persistence. And then, so there's 2 elements. There's the persistence, and then the other part is having instinct and knowing when your time has come and operating at your highest possible level when that time arrives. And that's a bit of an art. Look, there's a reason why not everyone becomes successful, because if it was easy, we'd all be doing it.
Yeah.
Right? It's that old cliche.
I think that's why a lot of people are afraid to take breaks as well, you know, because they're afraid they might lose that momentum, and take some getting back into it.
Yeah. Totally.
I'd like to transition a bit into technology and opportunities a little bit. What advice do you have for people that are looking to get into the music tech space and perhaps get their first job or start their first company? And do you think it's easier to get their foot in the door today than it was some years ago? Or how is the environment?
I think the music tech space is more vibrant than it's been in a long time. And that's driven by the fact that the recorded music industry is healthier than it's been in a long time. But I also think it's a mistake to conflate the idea that just because recorded music is doing well, that automatically means that music tech is easy, because it's not. In fact, music tech has its own challenges right now with, there's been an onslaught of mergers and acquisition or M&A activity recently, with lots of smaller companies coming together, because what's happening at the moment, we're all offering the same thing. So let's say you sign up to Lander because you want to master your track. And then while you're there, they go, hey, by the way, do you want music distribution? We do that. Or you go to Songtrader because you want your tracks published. And then while you're there, they go, hey, music distribution, we do that. Or you come to Vampr and you go, I want to connect with other creatives. And then while you're there, we go, hey, we do music. So what's happening is we're all, it's a bit of a
gold rush.
Well, it's a bit of I was going to say race to the bottom, but it's not a race to the bottom. And we can get into that if we want, but we're all coming from different places, but we're all offering very similar things. Now, my advice to anyone thinking about starting a music tech company right now would be run as far away as you can. I don't think it's a smart time to be starting a new company. I think it's a great time to be looking for employment in music tech. There's a lot of jobs going around right now. But this, just going back to that idea of race to the bottom, I truly believe, and this is why I do Vampr, that if you are the social network for any vertical, but the definitive space where people agree it's the right place to meet other folks in that space, that you then have an opportunity to sell those folks anything and everything that's relevant to them. So if you come to Vampr because you're a drummer looking for a bass player, and then you ultimately find further value in Vampr, whether it's through our creator tools, posting a vamp or a story and asking questions, connecting with people, discovering content, what have you. I truly believe that if we capture you that way, and then we want to sell you a discount on a drumstick, and we want to offer you, cheaper distribution or free distribution, and then we want to take care of your publishing and all that. Why wouldn't you trust it from the place that it's kind of it's your central home? Like the social network is the center and everything else sits around it. The approach that the other companies are taking is, we do mastering, but we're now going to sell these as well. And that's expensive, because then you have to market each of those services separately, and you have to let people know, hey, we don't just do mastering, we also do distribution, we also do XYZ. I don't think that's cost efficient in the long run. My belief is that if you get them there because it's their home and you nurture them, as we've talked about throughout this conversation, and then the sale of those additional services becomes
a natural extension.
Yeah, it's just self-evident. It's lateral, exactly. And so I truly believe that we're taking the right approach, and that at some point a company much larger than us in terms of pocket size will come along and appreciate that too. And look, we know that they are already, but we're just getting started as far as I'm concerned. But everyone right now is in this race to offer as many services. I just don't know how you tie those services together unless you have a heart. And I think the heart is the social network, and that's why I'm working on that.
Your answers may be like the best answers out of a guest. Like I got out of a guest so far, like in terms of oratory skills, in terms of everything.
Well, thank you.
Last question. In
Yes.
terms of networking, are you open to any collaborations / partnerships / mentorships / whatever? And if so, which kind, and which kind of people should approach you?
Yes, of course, always. My thing, I don't want to ever be the smartest person in the room. I hate when I feel like I am, because it means that I'm
In the wrong room.
I'm in the wrong room, yeah, and I'm wasting my time, frankly. I like learning. I like being humbled. I like being in awe. Being in awe is my favorite feeling ever. I was listening to a song today. It was an old Kanye West and Jay-Z song called Diamonds in Sierra Leone. And it was like the soundtrack to my high school experience. And I used to listen to it all the time. And for some reason, it came on shuffle today. And I texted the guy who recorded it, and I was like, you recorded this, right? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, that's fucking wild. Like, how am I texting someone who made the song that like defined my like high school experience? That's just so cool. And it's like, I want to be around that kind of energy all the time. I want to be around people that inspire, that have achieved. I have a lot of admiration for people who have achieved anything. And of course it's all relative, but of course I'm always open to mentors. Absolutely.
Amazing. Josh, thank you. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody listening did as well. And I'm really excited to see where your journey takes you in the future.
Thank you. And I'm excited to have our follow-up conversation in a year's time.
Yeah. See how that extra seed round, how did you call it?
Seed Plus.
Seed Plus. Yeah, perhaps Series B in a year.
I think maybe this time next year we could plausibly be talking about Series A. Is probably more realistic. Yeah.
What was the time frame for going public in your mind?
It's so hard to say, because some companies do it in 3 or 4 rounds, some take 10. Frankly, with the way that the market's working right now, with SPACs and reverse IPOs or reverse mergers and more traditional IPOs or direct listings rather as well. There's a myriad of options. There's probably never been a more fun time to be a private company, insofar as there's, as I just said, there's a lot of options and a lot of ways we can go. I honestly, part of me fancies the idea of an acquisition by a much larger company more than an IPO, because I'd love to see what Vampr could do with cash,
right backing. Yeah.
you know? So part of me really wants that. But anytime I've ever sat down with a bigger company to discuss that, I haven't been able to, as part of the offering, I've not been able to secure enough of a budget for the company to do what I want to do. And so from that perspective, I just go, screw it, we'll keep doing what we're doing and we'll ride it all the way to IPO. So I'd be happy with either outcome, but it needs to be under the conditions that serves every stakeholder, from our shareholders to our users to myself and my co-founder. It needs to satisfy our collective needs, and so I won't settle for anything less.
How can you make sure that you're going to keep the heart of Vampr in Vampr afterwards?
Because I've done it for 6 years.
Yeah, but when it scales up, when someone acquires it, or after it becomes a public company, there's more opinions involved. There's more.
If I leave, the answer is I probably can't do a lot to dictate that. But there's a lot I can do before I leave to make sure that there's a culture that exists today that remains. One of the things, just last night we had a tricky team meeting. There was a bit of a bug that prevented a big marketing thing we were about to do. And the conversation was one of the hardest ones we've had this year. And then I jumped back on the phone after the meeting and I called a team member and I said, do you think that was too harsh? And the person said back to me, I was just talking to my partner at dinner last night, but even when things get really hard at Vampr, there is a sense that everyone's opinion is completely valued and wholly listened to, and no one's laughed at or criticized or what's the word I'm looking for? Like punished, I guess. Punished is the wrong word, but no one's sort of scapegoated. Yeah.
Okay.
Scolded. And it was lovely to hear that back from one of the team members, because that is something that I think is important in company culture. And I don't know how much you've been reading about the US and the UK labor force at the moment, but people are quitting at record numbers because workers have rightfully said, fuck this, I've had enough. And maybe it's my generation and I'm a young leader, and maybe I just represent the same thing that they're experiencing and feeling, but I don't profess to know what I'm doing. I just brought to Vampr the values that I was raised in and the experience that my generation has of the world, which is I want to be treated fairly, I want to be treated with respect, and I want to think that the input that I'm giving has a chance of not only being listened to, but actually affecting a company that's having an impact on millions of people around the world. And so it's quite easy to implement that. You just have to be a respectful person and have some empathy and listen. It's not rocket science. So I try and extend that throughout the company, and I think it works.
Yeah, just be a decent human being.
Yeah, it's not hard. You just treat others as you would like to be treated yourself. It's really quite straightforward.